Inter, hospital waiting room, day. The relentless city noise blends with the muffled murmur of the public hospital on this Monday morning. In a narrow second-floor hallway where the pale green paint peels in places, dozens of people wait in mismatched rows of plastic chairs. The air hangs heavy with the familiar scent of disinfectant mixed with the sweat of collective anxiety. Among the waiting patients, a woman of about 60 stands out for her quietude. Seated in the third row near a window overlooking the hospital's interior courtyard, she keeps her hands clasped over a worn, synthetic leather purse. Her name is Helen Carter, though no one here knows it. To everyone present, she's just another number in the endless queue for a doctor's appointment. Helen wears a simple navy blue dress with small white flowers, a dress washed so many times the fabric is almost translucent in places. Her gray hair is pulled back in a low bun, revealing a face etched with wrinkles that tell tales of decades of hard work and quiet sacrifices. Her calloused hands, marked by small scars, betray years of labor in textile factories, where she spent most of her adult life operating noisy machines under fluorescent lights that could never fully dispel the shadows. What most catches the eye, however, is not her modest appearance or discreet posture. It's the way she breathes. Each inhalation seems to require a conscious effort, as if the air must be conquered anew each moment. Her shoulders rise slightly with each breath, and sometimes she closes her eyes for a few seconds, concentrating on the simple act of existing. A careful observer might notice her hand drifting to her chest from time to time in an almost imperceptible gesture, as if trying to soothe something stirring within her. The waiting room is packed this morning. Mothers with young children try to keep them quiet while constantly glancing at the electronic board displaying the called numbers. Elderly people doze in their chairs, some leaning on canes that occasionally slip, producing a dry scrape against the concrete floor. Young people fidget impatiently with their phones, sighing loudly whenever a new number is called that isn't theirs. Helen arrived at the hospital at 5:30 a.m. She woke at 4 a.m., made a simple cup of tea and 2 slices of bread with margarine, put on her best dress, and walked the 40 minutes it took her here. She didn't have money for the bus, and even if she did, she preferred to save. Every penny saved was a small victory against the uncertainty that had become her constant companion since the first symptoms appeared. Her number is 123. The board shows 82. Helen does the math in her head and calculates she still has at least 2 hours of waiting ahead. She doesn't complain. She doesn't sigh impatiently like the others. She simply adjusts her purse on her lap and continues to wait, discreetly observing the people around her. To her right, a young mother tries to soothe a crying baby. The woman looks exhausted, with deep dark circles under her eyes and rumpled clothes suggesting a sleepless night. Helen watches for a few minutes and then does something no one else has done. She offers help. With a gentle smile, she leans slightly toward the mother and whispers, "Can I hold him for a little while so you can rest?" The young mother hesitates for a moment, studying Helen's kind face. There's something in those tired but welcoming eyes that inspires confidence. She hands the baby to the older woman, who receives him with experienced hands, like someone who has soothed many children over a lifetime. Helen gently rocks the little one in her arms, humming a lullaby she learned decades ago. The baby, as if by magic, begins to calm down. His cries diminish until they become low sighs, and soon he falls asleep in the lap of the stranger who welcomed him without hesitation. "Thank you," the young mother murmurs, tears of relief in her eyes. "I couldn't get him to stop crying." "It's normal, dear," Helen replies softly. "Sometimes they just need to feel a calm heart nearby." For the next 20 minutes, Helen keeps the baby in her arms, allowing the mother to rest. Other people in the waiting room begin to observe the scene with curiosity and, gradually, with a kind of silent admiration. There's something deeply touching in the image. An elderly woman, clearly facing her own health challenges, offering comfort to a stranger without expecting anything in return. When the baby wakes and is returned to his mother, Helen returns to her previous position, her hands once again clasped over her purse. But something has changed in the atmosphere of the room. People seem a little less impatient, a little more willing to look at each other with kindness. The hours pass slowly. The electronic board advances with a slowness that tests the limits of anyone's patience. Helen continues to wait, but her breathing is becoming more labored. Around 10 a.m., she begins to cough, a dry, persistent cough that makes her bend slightly forward. She tries to muffle the sound by covering her mouth with her hand, clearly embarrassed to be disturbing others. That's when the situation begins to complicate itself. A middle-aged man in a suit, carrying an executive briefcase, arrives at the hospital accompanied by an elegant woman who appears to be his wife. They go directly to the reception desk, where the man begins to speak loudly and demanding to the receptionist. "My wife needs to be seen immediately," he declared, tapping his briefcase lightly on the counter. "She has private insurance and can't be kept waiting in this mess." The receptionist, a young woman in a white uniform, tried to explain patiently. "Sir, the doctor who sees patients with private insurance only arrives at 2 p.m. Morning appointments are for public patients on a first-come, first-served basis." "This is unacceptable," the man shouted, attracting the attention of everyone in the waiting room. "My wife is unwell and can't be here with—" He gestured vaguely towards the seated people. "All these people." Embarrassment was immediate. People lowered their heads, others looked away. Helen felt the weight of his words like a punch to the stomach. All these people. That's how he saw them. As if they were less human for needing public health care, as if their pain was worth less than anyone else's. The man continued his tirade, now speaking even louder. "Don't you understand that people who pay taxes, who have insurance, should have priority? It's not fair that we have to mix with—" He stopped, as if realizing he was being too explicit, but the damage was already done. Helen felt her cough return with more intensity. She tried to control it, but the attack was stronger than her will. "That's why I would very much like you to let me examine you now. No line, no wait. Not out of privilege, but because I recognize a warrior when I see one." Helen tried to protest. "But doctor, I can wait my turn." "No, Mrs. Carter. Someone who has waited so long in life has already fulfilled their quota of waiting." The doctor helped her up and, supporting her arm, began to walk with her towards his office. But before leaving the waiting room, he turned one last time to everyone present, and to you, who witnessed this conversation. I ask you to remember, each person here carries a story, carries pains and victories that you don't know. Let's treat each other as we would like to be treated in our most vulnerable moments. As Helen and Dr. Edward walked down the hallway, something extraordinary happened in the waiting room. The silence gave way to a low murmur, but not of complaint or impatience. It was a murmur of reflection, of people processing what they had just witnessed. The young mother whom Helen had helped earlier began to cry silently. An elderly gentleman got up and offered his seat to a pregnant woman who was standing. Other people began small gestures of kindness. Someone offered water to someone who was coughing. Another gave up their place in line for someone who seemed more debilitated. It was as if Dr. Edwards' gesture had planted seeds of humanity in every heart present. And if you are listening to this story, and it is touching your heart in the same way it touched mine, I would like to invite you to be a part of this current of kindness. Subscribe to our channel, turn on the notification bell, because here we share stories that remind us of the best that exists in human beings. Stories that inspire us to be better versions of ourselves, just as Dr. Edward was inspired by Helen all those years ago. In the office, Helen received the care she needed. The tests revealed that she was developing an occupational lung disease, a result of years working in poorly ventilated factories. It was treatable, but she would need regular follow-up. "Dr. Carter," said the doctor, using the title affectionately, "I want you to know that from today you will have priority follow-up here at the hospital, not as a favor, but as recognition for everything you have already done for society." "Doctor, I haven't done anything special." "You raised 5 children alone. You helped a sick sister. You contributed to the education of underprivileged children. You worked a lifetime with dignity. And even today, even feeling unwell, you offered help to an unknown mother. Do you think that's little?" Helen didn't know what to answer. She had never thought of her life that way. "In addition," Dr. Edward continued, "I'd like to extend an invitation. We're starting a hospital humanization program, training staff on the importance of dignified care for all patients. Would you consider helping us by sharing your story with our teams?" I don't know if I could speak in public." "You don't have to give speeches. Just be yourself. Your presence alone teaches everything we need to learn." When Helen left the doctor's office 2 hours later, she was carrying prescriptions, a follow-up appointment schedule, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not just hope regarding her health, but hope in humanity. In the waiting room, she found a transformed scene. People were chatting with each other, sharing stories, and offering mutual support. The young mother ran up to her. "Mrs. Carter, how was the appointment?" "It was good, dear. And you, did you manage to be seen?" "Yes, and the baby is fine. But I wanted to thank you again for helping me this morning. You can't imagine how much that gesture meant to me." Helen smiled. Sometimes it's in the most difficult moments that we discover how much more alike we are than we imagine. Several other people approached to greet her, to thank her for the example she had set, to wish her well. Helen realized that, without knowing how, she had become a kind of symbol in that hospital. Not a symbol of fragility or need, but of dignity and resilience. When she finally headed for the exit, she found the man in the suit in the parking lot. He was alone, leaning against his car with a thoughtful expression on his face. Upon seeing her, he approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I would like to apologize for what happened this morning. It wasn't right of me." Helen watched him for a moment, studying his face. She saw there no longer arrogance, but a genuine expression of remorse. "You don't need to apologize, sir. We all sometimes forget that we are more alike than different. May I offer you a ride home, as a way of making amends?" Helen thought for a moment. She was tired, and the way back would be long. But more than that, she realized that this man needed that opportunity for redemption as much as she needed the ride. "I accept, thank you." During the drive to Helen's house, the two talked. Robert, whose name was Robert, explained that he was going through a difficult time at work, that his wife had been ill for months, and that frustration had caused him to react inappropriately. Helen, in turn, talked about her life, her children, her difficulties, and her joys. When they arrived at their destination, Robert was visibly moved. "Mrs. Carter, you reminded me of my father. He was also a worker. He also went through hardships. I forgot where I came from. I forgot the values he taught me. Thank you for reminding me. Your father would be proud of the man who is here now, acknowledging his mistakes and wanting to be better. That's what matters." In the days that followed, the story of what had happened at the hospital spread organically throughout the community. Not as gossip or sensationalism, but a narrative of hope that people needed to hear and share. Helen began receiving visitors at home. First, it was the young mother from the hospital, who brought the baby to officially introduce him. Then there were other patients she had met in the waiting room who wanted to know how she was feeling. Dr. Edward also stopped by a few times, not only to follow up on her medical treatment, but to talk about life. The hospital humanization program was launched a month later, with Helen as a special consultant.
She didn't give formal lectures, but she participated in meetings, shared her story when she felt comfortable, and above all, she was present. Her mere presence reminded all hospital staff why they had chosen to work in healthcare: to care for people, all people, with dignity and respect. Robert, the man in the suit, also became a regular presence at the hospital, not as a patient, but as a volunteer. He had asked Dr. Edward to contribute to the humanization program in some way, and ended up being assigned to help patients with bureaucratic and financial issues.
"Can I do something to help you, dear?" The young woman looked up, surprised that someone had noticed her suffering. I, I think I'm going to lose my baby," she whispered through sobs. "The doctor said I need to be on complete bed rest, but I can't stop working. I'm alone. I need my salary." Helen sat down in a chair next to the girl and took her hand. "What's your name, dear?" "Carla." "Carla, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I've raised 5 children, and each pregnancy brought its own scares and worries. But do you know what I've learned? That where there's love, there's always a way. But I don't know how I'm going to manage." "One thing at a time," Helen interrupted gently. "First, let's talk to the hospital social worker. She can help you get disability benefits for your maternity leave. Second, I'll introduce you to some people I know, women who've been through similar situations and can give you practical support." Carla stopped crying and looked at Helen with hope. "Would you really do that for me? You don't even know me." "Knowing someone isn't about time, dear. It's about recognizing the humanity in others. And I recognize in you a fighting mother who will give everything for her child." Helen spent the next 2 hours helping Carla. First, she accompanied her to the social services department, where a friendly worker explained all the available benefits. Then, she called 2 friends she'd met through the hospital, women who had gone through similar difficulties and who immediately offered to help with emotional and practical support. Carla stopped crying and looked at Helen with hope. "Would you really do that for me? You don't even know me." "Knowing someone isn't about time, dear. It's about recognizing the humanity in others. And I recognize in you a fighting mother who will give everything for her child." Helen spent the next 2 hours helping Carla. First, she accompanied her to the social services department, where a friendly worker explained all the available benefits. Then, she called 2 friends she'd met through the hospital, women who had gone through similar difficulties and who immediately offered to help with emotional and practical support. When they said goodbye, Carla was visibly calmer. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know how to thank you." "You've already thanked me," Helen replied, "by letting me make a difference. That's a gift you've given me." Walking home in the late afternoon, Helen reflected on how each day brought new opportunities for connection and care. She had learned that being helpful didn't require great resources or important positions. It only required being present, paying attention, and lending a hand when needed. Upon reaching her street, Helen noticed unusual activity at her neighbor's house, Mrs. Conception, an 80-year-old woman who lived alone. There was an ambulance parked in front, and paramedics were leaving the house. Helen ran over. "What happened to Mrs. Conception?" "She had a medical emergency, a fall," explained one of the paramedics. "She's conscious, but needs to go to the hospital for some tests." "Can I go with her?" "Are you family?" Helen hesitated for only a second. "I'm the family she chose." At the hospital, Helen stayed by Mrs. Conception's side throughout the treatment process. The elderly woman, who always seemed strong and independent, now seemed frail and scared. She held Helen's hand as if it were a lifeline. "Helen, I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, dear, but you're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not leaving your side." The tests revealed that Mrs. Conception had suffered a minor stroke, but that with proper treatment she could recover well. However, she would need special care for the next few weeks. "Does she have family?" asked the attending physician. "She has a son overseas, but we haven't been able to contact him yet," replied. "But I can take care of her." "Do you have experience with medical care?"
"I have experience with human care," replied simply, "and when necessary, I can learn the rest." The doctor smiled. "That's the most important thing." That night, Helen slept in an armchair next to Mrs. Conception's bed in the hospital. It wasn't a comfortable night, but it was a purposeful night. Every time the elderly woman woke up scared, she found Helen's friendly face beside her, offering tranquility and security. The next morning, when Dr. Edward made his rounds and found Helen there, he showed no surprise. "Mrs. Carter, you never stop, do you?" "Doctor, when you discover you can make a difference in someone's life, how do you stop?" "You're right, but you also need to take care of yourself." "I am taking care of myself," Helen replied, smiling. "Taking care of others is a way of taking care of myself. It reminds me of who I am and what truly matters." Mrs. Conception was discharged 2 days later, but with the recommendation that she shouldn't be alone for a few weeks. Helen, without hesitation, offered to move temporarily to her neighbor's house. "Helen, that's a lot of sacrifice." "Conception, you took care of your children when they were little and dependent. Now it's my turn to take care of you. It's not sacrifice, it's a privilege." The following weeks were intense, but also deeply rewarding. Helen cared for Mrs. Conception during the day, helped her with physiotherapy, prepared her meals, and at night the two talked about their lives, sharing stories and memories. It was during one of these nightly conversations that Mrs. Conception revealed something that deeply touched Helen's heart. "You know, Helen, I've always been afraid of getting old and alone. I thought I'd be a burden to others, that nobody would care about me when I was no longer useful. And now? Now I've discovered that I'm not alone. I've discovered that there's a family we choose, made up of people who come into our lives and decide to stay, not out of obligation, but out of love." Helen felt tears in her eyes. "You're right, Conception, and you're part of my chosen family too." During Mrs. Conception's recovery period, Helen received several visits. Carla, the young pregnant woman she had helped at the hospital, came to introduce her newborn baby, a healthy boy she decided to name Edward in honor of the doctor who had treated her so kindly. Robert, the man who had apologized in the hospital parking lot, brought groceries and offered to help with anything that was needed. The young mother whose baby Helen had cuddled on the first day showed up with a homemade cake and games to distract Mrs. Conception. "Look," Mrs. Conception remarked one day, observing the constant stream of visitors at her house, "my house has never been so full of life." "It's because people recognize a warm heart when they find one," replied Helen. "Your home has always been full of love. Now people are just returning the favor." 2 months later, when Mrs. Conception had fully recovered, Helen returned to her own home. But the experience had changed in both. They had discovered that caring for each other wasn't just a temporary need, but a richer, more meaningful way of life. Helen continued participating in the hospital's humanization program, but now with an even broader perspective. She had realized that humanization wasn't just about medical care. It was about how we choose to relate to each other in all aspects of life.
One day, during a program meeting, a young nurse raised a question that made Helen reflect deeply. "Mrs. Carter, sometimes I wonder, why do some people choose to be kind even when they receive bad treatment? What makes someone like you continue helping others even after being humiliated?" Helen thought for a long moment before answering. "You know, son, I've learned that we have two choices in life. We can let bad experiences make us bitter and closed off, or we can use those experiences to develop more compassion for others who are suffering. When someone treats me badly, I think, this person must be going through something very difficult to behave like this, and that makes me want to help, not retaliate. But isn't it difficult? Don't you ever want to give up?" "Of course I do," Helen admitted. "But then I remember something. Every time I choose kindness over bitterness, I become a better person. And every time I become a better person, the world gets a little better too."
Helen's words spread throughout the hospital and beyond. Staff members began sharing them with family and friends. Patients carried these reflections into their communities. Slowly, a quiet movement of kindness began to spread, like ripples in a pond after a stone is thrown into the water. 6 months after the conversation with the young nurse, Helen received an unexpected call. It was from a public school in the neighborhood, inviting her to speak to the students about values and citizenship. "But I'm not a teacher," Helen protested. "I don't know if I could talk to children." "Mrs. Carter," the school principal replied, "we don't need a teacher. We need someone who lives the values we want to teach." Helen's first lecture at the school was an unexpected success. She didn't give elaborate speeches or use complicated presentations. She simply told stories about her day at the hospital, about Mrs. Conception, about Carla and her baby, about Robert and his transformation. She talked about how small daily choices can make big differences. The children were mesmerized. They asked questions, shared their own experiences, and many showed a surprising understanding of empathy and compassion. At the end of the lecture, a girl of about 10 approached Helen. "Mrs. Carter, my grandmother is sick in the hospital. Can I visit her and be kind like you were?" "Of course you can, dear. In fact, your grandmother is waiting for that, even if she doesn't know it yet." From that day on, Helen became a regular presence at the school, not as a professional speaker, but as an adoptive grandmother to hundreds of children who learned from her that heroism doesn't require superpowers. It only requires choosing good when it would be easier to choose indifference. A year after her first visit to the school, Helen received a letter that deeply moved her. It was from a student who had already graduated and was studying medicine. "Mrs. Carter, I wanted you to know that I decided to become a doctor because of your stories. You taught me that healing people isn't just about medicine and surgery, but about treating each person as if they were family. When I graduate, I want to be like Dr. Edward, a doctor who sees the heart of people, not just their symptoms." That night, Helen reread the letter several times, each reading bringing new tears of gratitude. She had discovered something that many people never discover, that true success in life is not measured by personal achievements, but by the number of lives we manage to touch positively. Today, at 65, Helen continues her routine of care and kindness. She still makes her regular visits to the hospital, where she is received like a beloved celebrity. She still participates in the humanization program, now as a volunteer coordinator. She still cares for Mrs. Conception, who has fully recovered but maintained the special friendship with her daughter of the heart. She still visits the school regularly, always with new stories to tell. But perhaps most importantly, Helen discovered that her own life was transformed by the act of transforming the lives of others. The woman who once felt invisible and worthless now knows that she is one of the most important people in her community, not because of titles or recognitions, but by the lives she touched and the hopes she planted. And the most beautiful lesson of this whole story is that Helen is not special for being different from other people. She is special for having discovered what we all can discover, that within each of us, there is the capacity to be extraordinary through seemingly ordinary acts of kindness. Every morning, when Helen wakes and prepares for the day, she carries with her the certainty that somewhere, someone will need a smile, a kind word, a helping hand. And she will be there, not as a hero of epic tales, but as the most precious kind of hero, one who chooses to do good simply because it's the right thing to do. Because ultimately, it's people like Helen, people who choose compassion over indifference, kindness over harshness, connection over isolation, who keep alive the hope that, despite all the difficulties, the world can still be a better place for everyone. And if you've come this far in this story, perhaps it's because you believe in that too. Perhaps because you too have a little bit of Helen inside you, waiting for the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. Because heroes aren't born ready. They reveal themselves one act of kindness at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Helen's story reminds us that we never know who is watching our acts of kindness, who might be inspired by our compassion, or how a simple gesture can create waves of transformation that spread far beyond what we can imagine. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth of all, that in a world that sometimes seems cold and indifferent, there's always room for one more Helen, one more person willing to see the humanity in others and act with love. The weight of silence sometimes can be broken by a single courageous voice that refuses to accept indifference as normal. And when that voice rises, whether in a hospital, a school, or anywhere human dignity needs defending, it reminds us all of who we truly are: a human family, connected by the invisible thread of compassion, capable of extraordinary kindness when we choose to open our hearts to others.